Welcome. I want to welcome you to this webinar. I really appreciate you spending some time with us. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President for National Engagement with a company called Polco. But my background is as a city manager in Minnesota for over 30 years. And now I'm working with communities around engagement and performance. The title of this webinar is How Community Feedback Drives Economic Success with ARPA Funds. Our hope is that during this conversation, you'll have the opportunity to pick up some perspectives and learn a little bit more about how to navigate through the overall ARPA process and simply help move your community forward with a particular focus on engaging your residents and businesses around economic recovery. We are really excited about this relationship that we have developed with the National League of Cities in this overall effort. NLC has played such a critical role in securing the funds that the ARPA program provides for the benefit of communities across this country. And our work with NLC is really kind of focused on designing a system that can help local governments gain a better understanding of community needs and track the effectiveness of the use of ARPA funds as you proceed over the next several years. Next slide. It's really difficult to quantify the significance of all of the disruption that has occurred to all of our communities over the past couple of years. If you just think about it from a business standpoint, business closures, unemployment, the rapid emergence of virtual workplaces, public health, all of these are things that you're contending with as you're designing your economic recovery efforts. This really unique federal grant program is really an opportunity for you to set your communities up for future success and long-term sustainability. So as you are working through and thinking about ARPA and how to use the funds to advance your community needs, I think it's really important to think about or recognize that the priorities that were existing 2 years ago may not be existing today. And so that's why it's so critical to really assess where your community needs are. And we take advantage of the opportunity. Over the past year plus, you probably have experienced an increase in the level of attention that residents are paying to local government and the service that you're providing. Take advantage of that increased levels of engagement in order to get that input from your residents and your businesses about things that will benefit you long term. However, I would ask that as you're listening to the conversation today, think about the bigger story that local governments can tell. The way that our POCO ARPA engagement package is structured, it's really designed to help us aggregate data across communities. So while the tools will be able to help you identify local needs locally, it will be able to also be aggregated to tell that bigger story so that we can actually represent how local governments have used these federal dollars for moving communities forward across the country. It's just a really important thing to be paying attention to. Next slide. I'd like to, we have a wonderful panel programmed for us today. Here's the agenda in front of you. We have the opportunity to listen to the National League of Cities and to learn a little bit more about how to proceed through the ARPA program, what are the critical issues. We had a great opportunity to work with the Downtown Boulder Inc. Last year as they undertook a survey that was around engaging your residents for business reopening and with a specific focus about resident readiness. And so I'm really excited about learning a little bit more about that. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're sharing the tools and the resources that we have available so that you can navigate your way through the ARPA process and benefit in really kind of measuring the progress and effectiveness of these resources in advancing your community. Like most webinars, if you have questions, we'll provide opportunities at the end. And I would just simply suggest that you add the questions in the chat box and we will get to them after the panelists are completed. So let me introduce the panelists real quickly. I'm really happy to introduce Mike Wallace, who's the National League of Cities Legislative Director for Housing, Community, and Economic Development. Mike has played just such a critical role in the overall ARPA program for the past year plus as this program has been structured and has been really instrumental in helping communities just understand the aspects of the ARPA program that we need to all be paying attention to. Really happy to have TERRI TAKATA-SMITH here, who's the Vice President of Marketing and Communications for the Downtown Boulder Partnership. I'm really excited to hear about what their experience has been through that survey and how they're using their data to help inform their economic recovery efforts in her area. And then finally, Michelle Kobayashi, founder of the National Research Center with over 20 years of survey science experience, really an important member of our team. She's now POCO's Senior Vice President for Innovation. Really appreciate all of you being here. And what I'd love to do right now is hand it over to Mike Wallace for a conversation about the ARPA program.
Well, thank you, Matt. I'm really pleased to be here today. I think what the exciting thing about this program, and if you go to the next slide, please. The exciting thing about this program is there's a lot of resources for cities, 65 billion of direct aid over 2 years that goes to every city, town, and village across America. That means no city is coming to the table hat in hand seeking additional resources. It creates a lot of opportunity, but the dollars come with a tremendous amount of responsibility too. This is Congress essentially relying on local governments to do their part to pull the country back into an economic recovery, to help get households that were harmed by COVID back to work and back into attractive economic mobility. And so, along with those dollars, this tremendous amount of responsibility on local governments means they're probably going to have to do some things that many, especially those that have not managed a federal grant or haven't managed a federal grant for a long time, don't have sort of in-house experience doing. And I think it's exciting to team with Polco here to help provide some of that assistance. If we go to the next slide, please. Just want to make sure everyone knows the information that I'm going to talk about today are pulled from source materials directly at Treasury. I encourage everyone to use this slide to go see the source materials themselves so that they can obligate their dollars with confidence. Next slide, please. NLC, early on, we were involved in making the case to Congress, helping to explain what local governments do, securing these funds. And so we've had a long time to think about how cities, ought to approach these dollars. And this is one approach. You've come up with sort of 5 initial principles for you to help guide your community conversations. Think about how you're going to obligate those dollars. There's so many things you can do with the ARPA grants. No city has a big enough grant to do it all. So you're going to have to prioritize. And the first thing you ought to do is assess your local government operations. And I know that's what many cities are doing. They're looking at what they've had to cut. They've had to do furloughs, layoffs, cuts in services. Do what you need to do to restore all that. But it's not just government operations. You really need to assess your community needs by engaging directly with residents, and especially those hard to reach residents and stakeholders, to develop a plan for recovery. Because like I said, these dollars are not just for government operations. It really is to help individual households, individual small businesses get back to where they need to be. And number 2 is use each ARPA revenue source strategically. So every city's getting a local fiscal recovery fund grant, but there's a lot of programs within the American Rescue Plan Act, programs for small businesses to apply to directly, programs for homeowners or renters who have been trouble paying their bills to seek aid, for instance. While you can use your ARPA grant dollars for that, use the other program dollars as much as you can. And prioritize fiscal stability and equitable recovery. Treasury has made addressing long-standing inequities an eligible use of these funds, and we think that's a good use of these funds because we know the inequitable treatment of certain communities really, COVID really exacerbated their condition, that negative condition. And so, for instance, communities where people are living doubled up or tripled up in housing couldn't maintain social distancing. If you have communities like that, you can use these dollars to sort of help get them back on track. Number 4, you have to have a plan to maintain records and document the impact. This isn't just a good advice. This is a requirement from Treasury. This program will go on at least until 2026. And so you want to hold on to those records well past 2026 because while Treasury will be looking at the reports you're providing now, the inspectors generals could be looking at how you spent decades from now, and you want to be able to provide whatever evidence and documentation you have, should that be the case. And then lastly, your congressional delegation is part of your success. They are instrumental in delivering these funds to you. When you do reopenings, when you do ribbon cuttings, invite your congressional delegation. Make them part of the success of your community. Next slide, please. This is just a long list of eligible uses just under one subcategory of one category of spending for economic impact. You'll see here, you can use these dollars for very flexible uses: job training, small business economic assistance in terms of direct cash assistance or loans, aid directly to impacted industries. You can use these dollars to do parks improvements, patio facade improvements, lots of things to get people back out onto Main Street, basically, and to restore businesses. But you'll see this looks like a pretty complicated set of expenditures, and that's where I think Polco's tools really sort of come into play. Treasury Department's requiring a really sophisticated level of engagement and data collection and documentation. And because cities have been on shoestring budgets, and because cities have lost revenue that they didn't anticipate, they're being asked to do a lot at a time when they may be, least equipped to do so. So, additional tools that can help you provide what Treasury needs are going to be really important. So you can do sort of the deep systematic community engagement that Treasury is requiring, especially to track the effectiveness of your grant dollars. That's going to be key, both for this grant program, but that's what Treasury is going to want to see from local government grantees. So that's why we're excited for that. And like Matt said, not only was it going to help your community, Polco and NLC together will be able to track data nationally across jurisdictional bounds, if you're using these tools in an effort to be able to determine which activities produce the best outcomes. And once we have that data and can figure that out, we can share that back out to cities so they can be more effective. Next slide, please. This is sort of an example, of assistance that's available to small businesses. 400,000 small businesses have closed since the beginning of the pandemic, yet they're responsible for 2/3 of net new jobs. It's clear there's going to be no broad national economic recovery if we can't help stand up small businesses on our main streets and get people back to work, back to commerce. But it's not good enough just to think about the small businesses. You really want to be sure that the small businesses you're helping are those businesses that are treating their workers well, right? So you want to see things like, are they paying something close to a livable wage in your community? Are there training opportunities for low and moderate income residents to be able to get on a track to employment through the businesses that you're helping? There's things with these dollars. If you're going to help a small business, then you have a stake in their success, but you also have a say in some of this. And you want to make sure that the small businesses you're helping are also helping the community at large with their own sort of commercial practices. Next slide, please. So there are many conditions related to who you can help with these dollars. And part of what you're going to have to do as a city is document that you've met these conditions to Treasury, because if you don't, that's a violation. So you'll see that, small businesses who you're helping, you're going to have to show there's a nexus to COVID-related harm. And that's why they deserve, or that's why they qualify for help under this program. The harm could be either immediate or it could be delayed. You also have to make sure your assistance is proportional, and that means you can't provide a grant amount that far exceeds the needs of the business that you're helping. And to determine that level of need, you're going to have to find some documentation and some data from that business so that you can show Treasury that that's proportional. And lastly, the conditions, the rule allows cities to target dollars to those small businesses either that have experienced the worst harm, or small businesses that primarily serve residents of distressed communities, which we know is absolutely essential. Having those small businesses is part of an overall community revitalization strategy that you'll need to be successful. Next slide, please. These are just a couple of the specific examples I've drawn directly from the Treasury rule that you could, that cities can do to help small businesses, providing loans or grants to mitigate financial hardship, such as business closure. You can support payroll and benefits costs, other costs related to retaining employees. You can help offset the cost of rent, mortgage, or utilities, or operating costs. You can help local businesses reconfigure to better, to be a better. So the spread of COVID doesn't happen as frequently within those small businesses. That's what I'm trying to say. So that'd be sort of like HVAC improvements, so that viruses don't get spread by mechanical machinery. And lastly, you can use these dollars to provide technical assistance and counseling and other services. So if you have a local entrepreneur that doesn't know how to get started but has a good plan, you can help them with training, how to navigate other federal sources, how to get access to credit, how to do their taxes, how to maintain all the code compliance and so forth. You can use your dollars for that kind of assistance to put your local entrepreneurs on the path to success. Next slide, please. And these are just a few more regulatory requirements. Local governments are encouraged to address the needs of businesses and households that were disproportionately and negatively impacted by the public health emergency. So the deeper the harm, the more funding you could potentially provide them in terms of aid. Treasury is encouraging expenditures that foster strong, inclusive, and equitable recovery with long-term benefits for health and economic outcomes. So, address your immediate needs, but you really want to try to spend in a way that produces lasting benefits to your community. And you really won't know where to start with that if you're not looking at the right data. Funds, let's see. And I think I won't go fully through this slide, but it's there for folks to read. And we'll go to the next slide, please. So NLC's produced like a tremendous amount of resources on this. We have dozens of blogs. We have a local action tracker. You can enter in keywords and see what other cities are doing that are the same size as you, different fact sheets, frequently asked questions, and webinar recordings. We know local governments are going to need help obligating these dollars in a way that produces the best possible lasting outcomes, and that also ensure that they maintain compliance with reporting requirements, expenditure requirements. It's a lot of administrative overhead, and anything you can do to help with that is going to ultimately benefit your community. Next slide, please. This is just a sampling of the different resources that NLC's already published and we continue to publish. But you can look for, if you want to prioritize childcare, we have resources for that. If you want to prioritize economic mobility, infrastructure, things like wastewater, stormwater, broadband, income security, food access. Like I said, no city is going to be able to do it all because these are big grants, but they're not big grants to do everything. So you'll have to work with your community to prioritize what you want to lift up and where you want to spend your dollars. And once you've made that determination, NLC has these resources ready for you to come figure out, where do you start? Next slide. And I think that takes care of my bit.
Hey, Michael, thank you for that great summary. National League of Cities has just played such a critical role throughout this process. And the material that you shared is a great illustration of all of the support that you have provided communities throughout the country. You're playing such a critical role. I'm really glad that you brought up the aspect of the idea of being transformational and strategic in decision making, and the value that communities and NLC will have by being able to aggregate data so that you can draw that bigger picture. I just think that can't be underscored enough. I tell you, it's not self-evident. It's not apparent what the best uses are, I think, to most local governments. Otherwise, we'd all be doing it. We really need the data to show us and direct us into, what kinds of activities produce the longest lasting positive outcomes. Yeah, particularly as you think about the work that you do with federal advocacy and needing to have that data in place in order to present the stories and the arguments and to really build how effective these federal dollars have been in just moving communities forward. So thank you so much for being part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Well, let me invite Terry TAKATA-SMITH to join the conversation. Now, we had this great opportunity last year to participate in a survey that was led by her organization. Terry, I would love it if you would just share a little bit about your organization and the survey that you undertook, including some of the data-informed decision-making that you did as part of that overall effort.
Sure, Matt. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. We are so extremely grateful for the work we were able to do with POCO during last year when things were so crazy and hectic and nobody knew exactly what direction we were going. So a little bit about our organization. Next slide, please. So the Downtown Boulder Partnership is actually an umbrella organization for 3 entities. The Downtown Boulder Business Improvement District, which was established in 2000, is basically a 49-block walkable district with the Pearl Street Mall kind of front and center there. The Downtown Boulder Community Initiatives is a 501c3 nonprofit with a mission to engage locals and visitors alike through arts, culture, innovation, and inclusion for community-driven experiences. And then the Downtown Boulder Partnership is a 501c6 membership-based organization that was established back in the 1970s from a lot of our original business owners. So we have about 125 retailers and just over 100 restaurants within the downtown district. We are a little over 70% locally owned and operated, so very focused on the small business community. And I've been in my position a little over 13 years overseeing marketing and communications. Next slide, please. So last year seems so far away, but each day was very long. And when the pandemic first hit, everything basically came to a standstill for our business community in late March. We spent most of April trying to help our small businesses just stay afloat by providing as much B2B support as we could through webinars, emails, resources from local, state, and national government. But by the end of April, the question on everybody's mind was, what do we do now? How do we move forward? We know that at that time, POCO was working with Downtown Colorado Incorporated on a statewide impact survey. And we were anxious to see the results of that survey, and also around that time decided internally that we really needed to start gathering as much information and feedback from our local community as possible to help our businesses make some informed decisions about how they were going to operate in the short term. So the Downtown Boulder Partnership started working on our own internal survey nearly the same day as POCO announced plans to launch the resident readiness survey. And it was absolutely just what we wanted to do. So it was just great timing. And we joined forces, I think, actually launching the survey right after POCO hit the launch product and it was up and running. So we were successful in gathering about just over 1,000 surveys in a relatively short amount of time. And this was so critical for us in reaching the local residents and really getting their feedback and support. So we gave them a really short turnaround. We asked for responses within 7 days. And what was key was to get the survey in the right people's hands. For us, that was every resident living in Boulder County. So we utilized the resources that we have through our email communication, our social media, but then we really relied on the small business community to help us because we wanted to hear from their customers as well. So we had our small businesses utilizing their email list and their social media. We partnered with all of our amazing community resources like the Boulder Chamber of Commerce, the Boulder Convention and Visitors Bureau, the City of Boulder, and we really all worked together. There's always been a collaborative spirit in Boulder, but never more so than what came during the first few months in particular of the pandemic. We all just bonded together to do everything possible to help the business community. And we were really great about sharing resources and information. So we got that information out, and then that kind of led us forward into making some decisions about moving forward over the course of the next few months. Matt, do you want to stop or you want me to keep going?
We'll keep going. Yep. You want the next slide?
Okay. Angelica, yeah, thank you. So kind of what I put a few examples together of things that we used kind of coming out of the survey. So it provided us a much needed roadmap. The responses allowed us to get out of our own heads and see perspectives of those that we needed support from. I think at the beginning, when we were all kind of scrambling, a lot of our personal beliefs and feelings about what was happening were getting in the way of us being sure that we were actually serving the greater good of the community. So it was super important that we got those results back to really see where people's heads were. What we were pleasantly surprised to learn was that over 70% of those who responded to our survey supported small businesses opening with restrictions, which that's at that point in the year as when we were coming out of the lockdown, but not exactly sure what that was going to look like. So we were really excited to see that there was so much support and concern of how to keep small businesses afloat. We wondered about policies and procedures that would have taken a lot of time and effort from small businesses that residents didn't even feel strongly about. So we started going down the road of looking for a universal procedure where we could have the businesses meet guidelines and then have some sort of collateral showing that the businesses were adhering to various policies. But through the survey results, we learned that some sort of stringent guideline like that wasn't really necessary. Our residents just wanted to know that masks were being enforced, that social distancing was being enforced. So we were able to come up with collateral that really reinforced what the people were thinking about and what they wanted to see to feel comfortable coming back to downtown and supporting those businesses. The businesses were able to analyze the data and make applicable business decisions that worked for them, including hours of operation, if they were going to switch over to e-commerce, if they were promoting gift card sales more than product sales. So they got a lot of key information. Next slide, please. As an organization, what came out of it for us was the ability to make clear and concise and unbiased decisions. It was looking at the situation from many perspectives, and we were able to figure out a marketing campaign that we were able to launch in a timely manner, but didn't feel too rushed based on resident feedback, and also with messaging points that addressed what our businesses were doing to match what was important from the residents through their comments and suggestions. So we focused on showing our community what businesses were doing to ensure their safety. We created pandemic-related signage that we used not only in marketing, paid marketing pieces, but also in yard signs that we put up throughout the Pearl Street Mall. And we formed a short-term marketing plan. So normally I have a marketing plan laid out a whole year in advance. That all went out to the window last March. And so what we were able to do through this survey was come back with a concrete plan with backup of why we were doing what we were doing and how we were going to move forward. And at a time when everything was in pure chaos for our businesses, this just kind of provided a moment where we all could ground ourselves in actual research and facts and really understand the community and actually get reassurance from the community that they were supporting what we were doing and excited to welcome the businesses back. So the POCO platform itself was extremely useful and user-friendly. The dashboard provided a really easy way for us to watch the surveys come in and gather feedback as we go, and presented that information in a way to all of our business community that, while they were being inundated with emails and information, really helped them focus on what was important and get the research that they needed to open successfully.
Terry, thanks. Just a question. Congratulations on the survey work that you did this last year. It sounds like it really provided you some really helpful information. I'm kind of curious, for those folks that are listening to the webinar today and they're starting now, we heard about the importance of assessing needs, community needs and business needs. What would you suggest to the folks that are listening today as the things that have worked really well for you in getting business owner input on things that are impacting them? Are there any particular things that work well for you?
We just needed to open all lines of communication. So small businesses are so busy in their everyday lives. We reach out in many different manners, whether it be phone calls, emails, newsletters, even going door to door. We try to make sure the business community understands all of the different channels that we have available, and all the ways that we're willing to listen and gather information. We also launched a Slack channel during the pandemic, which is another great way to communicate with a large group of people. We haven't found a magic key or nugget that helps us get all the businesses on the same page in one specific manner. So just taking extra time to look at all the different channels and ways that individuals feel comfortable engaging was really important for us.
And as you think about your business community, I mean, so many communities are made up of small businesses. I'm curious about, have you seen any emerging trends on business issues or impacts that have kind of have evolved over the last couple of years that you'd like to highlight or point out? I'm thinking of transitions to e-commerce as an example, or a lot of the carry-out kinds of work that help to keep a lot of businesses alive.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that was made really evident quickly early on for the small business community, a lot of our businesses had pretty simple websites, most of them not focused on e-commerce, and just basic information, which became really critical once the stay-at-home order was introduced, and the business community realizing that even if they weren't going to an e-commerce model, that a more robust website with plenty of information or a way for customers to easily find them was critical. A lot of them also looked at opportunities through Google and some of the Google tools, again, just to help people figure out what businesses were open, what restaurants were offering takeout. Hours of operation became really critical during that time frame. So a lot of the questions as an organization that we were fielding were people reaching out to us that couldn't exactly get the information from an individual business. So I think there's been a huge push to make sure there's an online presence of some sort. That's become pretty critical. I think another thing, again, in looking at different business models, is the opportunities to shop with a personal shopper, and then just have people pick up stuff. I think our businesses are being really thoughtful in how they're moving forward with business models, knowing that the loss of tourism could be absolutely devastating to a community in the long term. Not having out-of-town visitors for so long last year was devastating to so many different communities. And so the need to engage residents also, what can we do to make sure that the people that live 2 or 3 blocks away from the Pearl Street Mall, who maybe used excuses of, well, there's too many people down there, or there's no parking, or whatever it is, that we really got those people more involved and eager to support their neighbors.
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, in addition to just really being impressed by the survey that you did and to the benefit of your community, and how you've been able to benefit from that. You know, one of the reasons why we wanted you to tell your story is because sometimes communities don't really understand the value of data and how it can actually help guide and inform decision making. And so, given your experience and the work that we do at Polco, it leads really very nicely then into describing our ARPA engagement package. And so with that, thank you for sharing some stuff with us about your experience. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed the last slide. Do you want to cover that?
No, thank you. No, this was just the campaign, the brand campaign that we launched was called We're Back Boulder. And again, taking some key words and phrases from the survey, from what the residents told us, we tried to incorporate that in our messaging. So that's just kind of what it wound up looking like.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off one slide early.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Terry. I really appreciate your being involved in this. Well, let me invite in Michelle Kobayashi, who's going to take some time to kind of describe what we have configured and designed and developed for our ARPA engagement package for the benefit of the communities. And Michelle, I'd love to just kind of start off by having you talk about, you know, why should community leaders use stakeholder voices to help navigate this COVID recovery process?
Thanks, Matt. I'm happy to be here. You know, there are actually a number of good reasons for you to include your constituents in making these decisions about ARPA. Number one is you actually are kind of required, not quite required, but the Treasury has urged the states, counties, cities to actually engage their constituents in developing their plans. And also, we hear more from the Treasury in terms of documenting your impacts. We believe the voice of businesses and residents and the folks you've helped and given recovery funds to will be important to demonstrate that you actually used the funds well and also saw the outcomes that you intended. Next slide. But also, beyond what the Treasury and the federal government is telling you to do, there are reasons to do that beyond that, because we really think that involving residents and businesses and other stakeholders in your community in community decision-making is the best way to arrive at the best decisions. COVID has turned our economies and our lives upside down the last year, and there's so many areas that it has hit, some ways in positive, but mostly detrimental. And so there's so many places you could use ARPA funds for spending. At first glance, it looked like these ARPA funds would be very generous to communities. But once you start considering all the impacts of COVID and the events of 2020, as well as the existing gaps and disparities that were existing in our communities prior to COVID in 2020, you realize there's not enough money to go around. And that means there's going to be a lot of competing priorities, a lot of competing interest groups, all vying for the funds. And so right now is the best time to identify which areas are the biggest needs, what disparities exist the most, and then also to be able to evaluate that over time so that we can be transparent, accountable, and just basically demonstrate that we're being good stewards of this funding given to us by the federal government.
Michelle, do you think that there's an increased interest on the part of residents as it relates to how they interact or the level of engagement that they have with their local governments?
You know, Matt, there are a few silver linings from COVID in 2020. And one of them we've been seeing is the fact that residents are starting to now differentiate the services of local government versus state versus the nation. I've done this work for 25, 30 years, and it used to be really hard to explain to residents the difference between what local government does versus other levels of government. And I think with COVID and the different kinds of regulations and rules and things that have come down, people are starting to differentiate that. And I think they're starting to respect their local governments more and understanding the role. What we found in some of the survey we've done is that a lot of residents are giving their local governments higher levels of trust and respect since the pandemic had started. And so I think that's a good thing. We're starting to differentiate the levels of government so residents do that. I also think they realize now with local government, they have more of a say. Some of the things they could say, the behaviors, they actually have an impact in their local communities, I think, in a way that maybe wasn't understood as well prior to COVID. So I think that's really important. And then third, I would say what's one more silver lining from COVID is basically technology. We did expose a lot of digital divide during the pandemic, but we also found a lot of people getting online using technology that was already existing. And so we're thinking that people are now starting to engage with their local government or within their community. They can do it in a more low burden way, because in the past, maybe you had to go to a public meeting and spend your whole Tuesday night waiting to talk to your council or talk to, community leaders. Now you can get online, you can chat, you can watch what's going on. And I do believe that this kind of increased use of technology is kind of maximizing the relationships communities can have with their residents.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, would you mind, could you just kind of share an overview of the POCO engagement package for the benefit of people on the webinar?
Sure. And so I have some slides here just to show a little bit about the POCO engagement package. And we developed this with the National League of Cities and ICMA. And basically it's our goal for communities across the nation to use our tools so that they make the best decisions with this money and are able to maybe really make transformational change in their communities. But the package consists, it's multi-tiered. So its cornerstone is surveys, which I'll talk about, and it's surveys to the business community and resident community. But we also have other tools on the platform that will help you gather information from stakeholders in terms of broad issues such as the economy or housing, but also very specific issues, whether you want to dig deeper into food security or housing affordability. We'll have those tools for you to make it easier for you to get a representative sample of stakeholders talking to you. It'll also give you data for these informed decisions. In addition, we actually think, because this is a new era, we have this money to spend, we're going to be trying new programs. It's going to be kind of trial and error. So we think it's really an important time for you to network with other communities like yourself or other networks just across the nation with the same challenges. So we have Polco Connect, which is a forum, so you can all talk together, share practices, best ideas, share your struggles, share what's working. And then also we at Polco NLC are going to kind of compile the best practices, blueprint types of policies, programs, and help you so you choose the most successful interventions. We also have benchmark data then to show how the progress you're making compares to others. Then finally, we kind of have these performance insights where we're going to do some next steps workshops where we help folks take that data and take it into action. We're going to create some webinars, ebooks, but again, sharing the best practices and also kind of helping report and understand the impacts of these funds so that we can let the Treasury as well as our residents and stakeholders know how successful we've been in spending this money. Next slide, please. So like I said, the surveys actually pretty much anchor the ARPA package, but the goals are to really, for four reasons. First of all, we want, and this is the question of the hour right now, for most local communities, you're trying to decide, how should we spend the money? Like we said, those funds are scarce given how many needs often our community has. So where should we target? Which areas are in the greatest need? Which groups need the money the most? But we're going to first start by helping folks understand where to focus their money. Also, we know that with the Treasury guidelines, there's a funding bucket in terms of making sure we help the people who are hit the hardest. But also with the new statements from Treasury, we really are starting to see that equity lens and looking at existing disparities and how we can actually start to lessen the disparities in communities that have often been exacerbated through COVID, or even if they just existed pre-COVID. We want to start looking at those disparities in communities and make sure we're helping the right folks. Once we've decided the topics we want to focus on, it's still not clear how we should actually approach the topic. Maybe we decide affordable housing is what we really want to focus on in our community, but there's a lot of ways to address affordable housing. You can do housing first, you can do vouchers, you can incent developers to do more infill. There's all different types of programs to help with affordable housing. What are the ones that are most supported by residents? What are the ones they're most willing to participate in? And really getting information from stakeholders on how they see those different types of alternatives and how willing they are to participate in that. And then finally, that evaluation of performance. Treasury is saying we want you to report back to us, and your communities and stakeholders are going to want you to show that you report back. So we're trying to do all these things with the package. So these are all available to communities across the nation. Next slide, please. And so here's a few, I'm going to show you a few screenshots from the reporting, from the type of tools we have, just to show you the kind of data you would get back. So in terms of the needs assessment area, here's a kind of report where we basically are asking residents what parts of the community, and we ask business leaders as well, what parts of the community, the quality and also the importance, and we merge these together to identify the focus areas. Which areas does your community have the most struggles? Is it in the economy? Is it in health and wellness? Is it in housing? That actually helps you decide where some of those big funding dollars need to go. Next slide, please. We also talked about those disparities. One of the important things we're going to do with the surveys is look at the different kinds of challenges we have in the community and look at those based on the background characteristics of residents as well as businesses. So we can look to see which group are lower household incomes with lower household having more food security challenges, or certain areas of the city having more food security challenges. Where are the housing challenges? Where the workforce development is needed? And it's through these kind of charts and graphics we're going to show folks the areas where they need to place more intervention and also be able to monitor that over time to see if we're lessening that disparity. Next slide, please. And then performance evaluation. Here's some slides showing, but we're basically going to show folks if you've decided to improve a certain area of your community, Are you actually improving it? Are things going the way they should be? And we're also, like I said, looking at those areas of disparity and looking if you increased or decreased or kept those gaps the same. But being able to show when you spent money towards a program, if it's working, and we'll be giving you this data at intervals, you'll be able to either shut a program down altogether if it's not working, make tweaks to it to make it more successful, or double down on those programs where you're actually seeing the most impacts. But all of these types of data will help you become very data-driven and also have, provide arguments for those of you who are trying to have you spend money in ways that maybe don't benefit the community as greatly as some of the ways you've chosen based on the data and the responses from the people who live in your community or work in your community. And I think that is what I have in terms of my slides.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. That was really helpful. I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that are thinking to themselves, okay, well, how do I go about undertaking the administration of this work? Can you share a little bit about how communities would actually administer the use of our engagement package?
Well, actually, it's pretty simple. That was the goal of the package. Is one of the kind of underlying tenets of the work that we do is low burden to residents, low burden to other stakeholders, and low burden to staff. So basically on the Polco platform, all of this information is there. So once they would sign up, they would actually start to deploy the surveys, and then everything else just starts flowing in. So we've just set it up. So it's very low burden, but also we think we're having the surveys go out every 6 months. And so basically we're going to get this index or set of questions over time. And that will be like the baseline for folks who want to do kind of the more minimum amount of outreach and work with their communities. But we have all these other processes that will support it that are more intense for folks who want to dig deeper, do performance measurement, want to really get more invested into the whole communication evaluation portion. So we kind of have different tiers. But in general, it's not hard. It's just, getting yourself organized to start engaging and thinking about using data and ways that you're going to involve this data into your decision making. Do you work with the councils as part of a plan? Is it, those types of things are the work the communities are going to have to do up front, thinking about the usefulness of it and the best places to infuse this data.
Yeah, thanks. And as we're just kind of finishing up this conversation, if you're listening and you have a question that you want to post in the chat box, please go ahead and do that. Now would be the best time to do that. Michelle, you talked about the frequency of administering the survey and the fact that the ARPA program lasts over a period of years. Can you talk about the value of doing that on a regular frequency and why a community would want to do that or how they would benefit from that?
Yeah, so we designed it right now that we would like you to do a baseline survey and then every 6 months talk to the key group of stakeholders. You can change that in a community if you really think 6 months is too often. But what we know, and a lot of people say, oh, what about survey fatigue? I think survey fatigue comes in when you either have super evasive tools, which we don't, or more importantly, when residents don't realize that you're actually using the data and what you're using it for. So part of the part on going through the platform is you will ask residents questions, but they'll also hear back from you on how you use that data and why it's important. And I believe, and what I know from working with residents, as long as they feel like they're spending 5-10 minutes with you every 6 months, but they know it's being used, that's what's important. So this process sets up a step where we can track progress over time, because the other thing I hate as a program evaluator is I don't like to do a program 4 years later, look at the outcomes and realize it didn't work. I've evaluated enough programs in my life to realize just because you have good intentions doesn't mean it always ends in good outcomes. So it's really important to have these kind of process evaluations over time. Also, because with the pandemic, it's not over. And so we are going to still experience changes, transformations, things that are happening in our communities. It may make it that new needs emerge a year from now, even if it has nothing to do with what you're currently planning. So our ability to track changes, look at community livability, and see what's happening in the lives of your residents and business owners, we think that 6 month interval is kind of crucial and just enough to give you the right kinds of data to move forward without overtaxing folks if you really, over the time period.
Yeah, thanks. Michael, if I could have you kind of join this conversation. Michelle gave a nice overview of the ARPA package, but as you put it in the context of what the ARPA program is designed to do, maybe with a bent around economic recovery, can you talk about the value of data and the use of data in decision making? Sometimes we get questions from communities about even their ability to use tools like ours and whether or not that's going to be an eligible expense. Can you talk about those in the context of community engagement and ARPA regulations? And I think, Mike, you might be off video and muted. Well, okay. Michelle, just kind of coming back to you then, can you talk about some of your experiences in economic recovery that might be helpful to communities in terms of how they would approach engagement with their business community or gaining a better understanding of their overall business needs?
You know, Matt, what's interesting is I don't have as many, I have some experience in economic recovery with businesses, but the one thing I do have more experience in is the last 20, 30 years, it has been kind of hard. We've had a national business survey we've used for years, where you actually, local governments survey their local businesses and find out their needs and what they want. And there has not been the greatest interest in that tool. There have been a number of communities like Boulder who've used it over time, but local governments have often focused much more on their residents than their businesses. And when I've talked to businesses, a lot of times they felt as though kind of the local government and they are kind of estranged. Their connection has not been super strong. But one of the things I believe that's really come from the pandemic that also is a silver lining is the fact that I think their interdependency of the local government and the business community is being felt much more strongly. And there's really kind of a kinship and a collaboration that's being built across America between local governments and their businesses. While in the past, I think a lot of local governments felt like it's not that they didn't support their business community, but they felt more of a hands-off kind of thing, like private sector is private sector, we're government, we're two separate entities, let the chamber take care of that. But I feel like with COVID, we see a lot more of these relationships getting stronger and folks working together. And I think with the ARPA funding, it's really giving government the permission to actually give money and assist local businesses where you haven't seen that much support in the past. So in terms of economic recovery, what I have seen is we've used a lot of tools in the past with the residents supporting the kinds of things they want to see in the downtown, what they are willing to do, what they're interested in. And we've worked then with local government who work with the business community to identify what type of businesses to attract, what types of things to do. So we've done a lot of work in that area. And I think that's what we'll continue to do with ARPA is how to make downtown stronger, how to develop those local businesses, how to get more people involved. But I do think that it's kind of new to the frontier of the collaboration between private sector and local governments. I'm seeing a lot more of that. And I think it's going to be really exciting during ARPA to see how that moves forward. Because I do think those private-public partnerships are probably some of the most strongest and creative ideas I've seen over the past decade in terms of what local government can do in communities. So I'm just excited to see how ARPA will kind of fulfill that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We have a question for TERRI that came in. TERRI, as a communicator, how should local governments talk about how they're using federal funds to their residents or even to Treasury?
To build off what Michelle was just talking about collaboration, I know the city of Boulder is sometimes limited in their resources in outreach. So again, a collaborative spirit with business organizations, business improvement districts, DDAs, anything where you can partner with community members, chambers. I think that there has been so much more of a sharing of information and an understanding of how all these different organizations and groups need to work together with residents as a whole in getting us all out of this together. So transparency, honesty, and ease in communicating, whether that be a web page where you're able to highlight projects or just making the information readily available and really making it read for just the commoner who doesn't have the time or might not put forth the effort into doing a lot of background research, just a really clear overview of what's happening and what is being planned.
I think that is so true. If you think about it from an economic development standpoint and the issues that you're going to run into for recovery, think about the impact on real estate because of virtual workplaces. Think about the bringing employees back from a workforce development standpoint and the resource needs that you're going to need to have now that you're entering into more of an internet age. All of the impacts of just the change in the way people and the comfort levels of people wanting to go into a store as opposed to shop online. That has all shifted from a couple of years ago, right? And so having a better understanding about what that all really means and then making sure that you're connected with all of your community partners and all of those channels that you have in the community for communications, and doing exactly what you're saying, Terry, and being transparent and honest, and really using folks and the talent and the thought leaders in your community to help you kind of navigate your way through here. With the benefit of these tools, I think is really going to be one way that communities can help with their overall economic recovery and overall community recovery, for that matter. Did anybody have any thoughts about that? Well, listen, oh, I got one more question. What is your advice for cities that are hesitant to spend any of the ARPA funds at this time? You like to take that? You know, I guess my sense would be, as it relates to when is the right time to use the ARPA funds, you obviously want to make sure that you're doing your homework and understanding what your community needs are. We've designed the ARPA engagement package as a tool for you to help identify where those priority areas are and how you can best use those funds to benefit areas of your overall community services in a way that would be most effective. I think that is all work that needs to be done. I think the worst thing that communities could do is to not do that work and go ahead and spend on what you think might be the best way to spend the monies, because that's really kind of a short-term thought process on what really should be a long-term. This is really an opportunity, I think, for communities to think transformationally, and how can you make sure that your community is going to be sustainable down the road. The things that you're doing with these ARPA dollars should probably not end up adding tax demands at the end of the ARPA program without having a conscious decision on the part of your decision makers that that's what they want to have accomplished. It really is something that's going to provide you an opportunity to think differently, recover in a way that's going to make the most sense for your community. And the only way that you can do that is to do that up front and then use the benefit of the funds to help you accomplish that. Are there any other questions that anybody has? We're coming up towards the top of the hour. Anybody that has been registered for this webinar will receive all of the slides and a copy of this recording. And so you'll get the benefit of that. I'll give it just a second here. Well, I tell you what, let's just wrap it up then. Thank you so much for spending the last hour with us. I hope this has been helpful. Really appreciate your attentiveness, and hope that this information has been helpful to you in working through the ARPA program and with your economic recovery.